Well, welcome to the College of Complexes. Can you hear me all right? You can't hear me? Testing 1, 2. Is this working?
It's on, but it's not up enough.
Oh. Testing 1, 2. Is that better? Okay. All right. Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 360th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give the speaker an hour to make a presentation. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter that we listen only one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. And then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time to make them. Any announcements? Jim, you got any announcements?
No, not tonight.
All right. You have announcements.
I found a home for my female pit bull.
Good. Just seen a big dog. He's been trying to give it away.
We used to hear the dog bark in the parking lot all the time, but we won't hear him anymore. He's in here. Next week is April 22nd. Sid Richardson and Texas Oil will be the. Sid Richardson is going to be talking about Dallas history professor and selling Texas author. Jim Gatewood will be talking about this writer of several books about Dallas history and discuss and review his latest book, Sid Richardson and Texas Oil. Jim will outline ramifications on resolving the question of rags to riches. He will also bring books for those who wish to purchase same. That's next week, so that'll be interesting. On April 29th, drug war and how we get into this mess and vested interests that keep us here. It's on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. Suzanne Wills is going to be, she's a retired CPA, and she'll be talking about that. On May 20th, Catherine Savers McGovern will be talking about on-the-counter democracy impact of the Trump administration's destruction plan. Thought it'd be interesting. It's on your itinerary. If you can't read it all, you'll find it on the internet. There's more there. Now, our speaker tonight is Roland Rangel. He's going to talk about love your country, leave your party, how partisan politics lost its grip. He's a candidate for U.S. Congress, District 24. He'll discuss the reasons behind the historic rise of independent voters. Ever been asked, are you a Democrat or Republican? Roland Rangel believes that the question is to determine if you're an ally or an enemy. He argues that party allies are often manipulated while their enemies are all too quickly demonized. Roland will argue that his marginalization of critical thinking, objectivity, and even common sense has thankfully declined and taken partisan allegiance along with it. He contends that the next step for positive change is to elect those ready to put the good of our country, not their party, first. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Roland Rangel.
Thank
you so much. Thank you guys for coming out tonight, and thanks to Tom and Jim and the College of Complexes for welcoming me. Again, my name is Roland Rangel, and I'm running for Congress. Yeah. Oh, I feel like I'm super loud. Am I not that loud out there? Yeah. Testing 1, 2, 3. Mic's up. There we go. How's that?
That's good.
All right. I'm running for U.S. Congress District. Thank you. U.S. Congress District 24. Now that makes up parts of Addison, Bedford, Carrollton, Colleyville, Capel, Dallas, Euless, Farmers Branch, Grapevine, Hearst, Irving, Plano, and Southlake. So if you live in those parts of town or know anyone who does, I encourage you to visit facebook.com/sendmetocongress. There you'll see where I stand on multiple issues. I may not look like your average politician, and I definitely don't act like it. I have no desire to rid your constitutional rights while getting rich off the backs of taxpayers. To me, it's more important to do good in life, and it's more important to be good. There's a great quote by Gifford Pinchot that says, "It's greater to be a good citizen than to be a good Republican or a good Democrat." Now, that speaks true to where we are at today in politics. You have these such divisive parties. I really don't like being called a politician. I rarely use the word hate, but I kind of hate it. I want to be known as a statesman. The difference being, a politician is going to tell you what you want to hear so he can get your support. A statesman is going to tell you what you need to hear and hopefully further the conversation. I know for me, whenever I'm out, talking to people, the first question I always get is, "Are you a Republican or are you a Democrat?" And that's frustrating for two reasons. The first being is there are multiple parties than just those two. There are constitutionalists, there are libertarians, there are green parties, socialists, and so on. But you start to see how much of a stronghold the two-party duopoly has on the system, to where that's what people automatically think. You have to be one of those two. And the other thing they're thinking when they ask you that, "Hey, is this my ally or is this my enemy?" And when people ask me that, "Are you a Democrat or Republican?" I like to give them a second, because I'm looking at their eyes and they're ready to pounce. It's really kind of frightening sometimes. And so I usually throw that back at them. I said, "I'm not your enemy. I know that's what you're waiting to hear." And I said, "We're all citizens here. We're all allies." But you start to see how much partisan politics has gotten a grip of people. And a lot of that is not only because of party leadership, a lot of that is driven because of television news networks. Example, Fox News. I rewatched this interview recently with Ted Koppel. He was talking to the Truth Sayers, and he interviewed Bill O'Reilly, leans right, interviewed Ann Coulter, also right, and interviewed Bill Maher, leans left. He also interviewed some media experts, and he asked them, why do you spew so much hateful rhetoric and shout down anyone who you think opposes your views? Don't you know that this sort of rhetoric is dividing the country even further in a time where we need unity more than ever? And this interview took place during the Romney-Obama election. And so when that question was posed, each of these political talking heads said, "Yes, we understand." They actually admitted it, that they understand that they are driving division, but to them, that didn't mean anything because they were making money. Their networks were making money. When Fox News first launched, they became a billion-dollar industry, because they spewed conservative, right-leaning ideals, and along with their slant on the news. When MSNBC learned that formula, they began doing the same for the left side, and that began to build profit for them as well. So you start to see where you get these Jerry Springer type politics, where it's all shouting, where views mean more than facts to them because it means more money. And you see how that snowballed into the Trump presidential bid, because he got so much coverage. It was to the tune of $4.6 billion in free advertising from all these networks, because they gravitate towards that reality TV type of personality. He got $4.6 billion in free advertising from the media. Now, to get some perspective on that, that is 12 times the amount the Super Bowl earned in advertising in 2016. That is insane to think about. And to give you some deeper insight about how networks work, my day job is I work in advertising. For a while, I was a producer and a writer for a TV show that aired on CBS 11 and TXA 21. And after that show had its run, I was invited to come interview for a producer's role at The Blaze, which is Glenn Beck's network in Las Colinas. And there was a new show they wanted to launch, and they were interested in having me as one of the producers and writers. The host of that show is Tommy Loren. Do anyone know who that is at all? It's like Bill O'Reilly times 10. Awful. And so when I went, it was the most awkward interview I've ever had in my life, because the entire time the people interviewing me they were trying so hard to determine where I lean politically. And so I remember going in and they asked, do you understand what kind of network this is? How do your views fare, with what we believe here and how we do things as far as operations go? And I assured them, when it comes to how I work as a producer, I want to present whatever the headline issues are with objectivity, practicing common sense, and making sure that we're being accountable for the type of information we're putting out there on the airwaves. They did not like that at all. Like, basically, the interview might as well have been done. And that showed me and gave me a deeper insight to how these networks work. They care more about spewing more hateful rhetoric than by being objective. So for me, I always encourage people to be independent voters. Unless you're running for office like I am, I feel it's only fair that I let people know that I lean libertarian. Normally, I'm a staunch independent myself. I'm going to be totally candid with you guys tonight. I know a lot of politicians don't do that. I'm going to be. Normally, I'm a staunch independent. I would never align myself with a party. But I feel, since I'm running for office, I should let people know, hey, I lean libertarian. And how did I discover that? I encourage you guys, if you get a chance, along with visiting facebook.com/sendmetocongress, if you also get a chance, check out this other website. It's called isidewith.com. The best political quiz I've ever taken, and it's gotten a lot of coverage in major news outlets too. And it's a political quiz, takes about 30 minutes or so, and they ask you everything and anything as if you were the president. And at the end, it filters your responses and show which parties actually agree with you as far as percentage points. And for me, Libertarian came out ahead strong, followed by Green Party, followed by, in the third distant, the Democratic Party. So that showed me, wait a minute, there are other parties besides Republicans and Democrats. Even my mom, I was talking to her about this website, and we had some downtime. And before she took the quiz, I asked her, which party do you think do you subscribe to? Oh, Republican, no question about it. So after we took the quiz, she was shocked that she's actually a constitutionalist. And she was like, I didn't even know that existed. And I said, well, now you have some research to do. What do they believe? What sort of candidates are there? So I encourage you again to visit isidewith.com. It's a great tool for learning where you stand. And if I could wish anything, I actually wish all candidates for all races had to take this quiz, because it would give the public way more insight into that person's ideals and views. But we talked a little bit about demonization, how these networks work, how parties work. Let's talk a little bit about manipulation. So we saw this a lot during the last presidential campaign. On the Republican side, the Republican National Committee made all their presidential candidates sign a pledge to support the nominee, whoever it was going to be. What happened there? No one dare thought it was going to be Trump, and it was. And Marco Rubio, all of them, Bush, Ted Cruz, who I actually felt bad for, they were all pressured by their party leaders to throw their support behind Trump. And I think personally, I've seen footage of Ted Cruz actually praising Bernie Sanders. I think if he didn't have to go with party alliances, he probably would have at least given Bernie Sanders a shout out, just because he trusted him against fighting corruption. But you see where the party leadership, it was more important for them to manipulate and force these other contenders to support Trump in hopes of getting their support bases to support Trump as well, instead of letting them have free thinking, be critical thinkers, and be objective. You also saw on the Democratic side, whether you like WikiLeaks or not, everything they revealed in the Podesta emails and in the DNC leaked emails, none of it was refuted at all. So the DNC WikiLeaks revealed that the DNC was actually working with Clinton, helping her out. There were also there was media collusion. They were sharing debate questions with the Clinton campaign ahead of the debates. They were brainstorming on how to stifle Bernie Sanders' campaign once his numbers started growing. Now, once all this was revealed, how they were trying to manipulate things on the backside, away from the public, once it was revealed, it actually led to their chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, stepping down. Not only her, but other leadership stepped down and people were fired. And the other thing that the DNC did to help their establishment candidate was they rolled back Obama's ban on accepting campaign contributions from lobbyists and super PACs because they wanted to pull further ahead of Sanders once his campaign was beginning to really blow up and gain a lot more traction. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, at the time when she was the DNC chair, she said, I forget with which network she was being interviewed, but she said that superdelegates on the DNC side, you have to have a superdelegate count in order to secure the nomination. She said that superdelegates exist in order to protect party leaders from grassroots activists. So what does that tell you? The leadership's views are way more important than the growing number of people who actually care and are paying attention and wanted someone like Sanders. Now I know some people say, well, Bernie Sanders isn't even a real Democrat. That's what people loved about him. You know, I'm not a strong Sanders supporter. I'm just saying I'm seeing the manipulation here and how there was a fight against him from their own party. They took a huge gamble on getting Clinton to win, even though poll numbers showed that Sanders would have won hand over fist against Donald Trump. They took a gamble with Clinton to where her margin of victory was very few percentage points that could have gone either way. So you see this type of manipulation from both the RNC and the DNC. One of the RNC rule maker leaders, where was my notes here? He famously said that Republican Convention Rules member Curly Holand said political parties choose the nominee, not the general public, contrary to popular belief. The media has created this perception that the voters will decide the nomination. So just to reiterate, Republican Convention Rules member Curly Holand said political parties choose the nominee, not the general public, contrary to popular belief. The media has created the perception that the voters will decide the nomination. When he was pressed further, then why even have primaries? He said that's a very good question. So your tax dollars are being used to hold primaries that are being used in turn to silence your vote. What does that tell you? These parties do not care. Now, I know there may be Democrats here, there may be Republicans here, or any other party. I'm not here to change your mind tonight, you know. But what I do want to do is challenge your thinking. I know when you've held on to, personally I know this from experience, when you've held on to a strong viewpoint for so long, but when you're pressed with new information, it's sometimes hard to change your perspective. There's a quote that I love by Alan Tolford. It says, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who can't read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." I was talking to a friend last year when I decided to run for a congressional seat, and it's an old college friend, and now he heads up a Republican group in town, a pretty big group. And so we sat down and grabbed some lunch, and he had asked me, he goes, "What's going to be your approach, you know, as a representative, assuming you get in office?" And I said, "Well, I want it to be true representation. You know, I want to ask people what their views are. I have this vote coming up. You guys weigh in, let me know what you think. Here's how I want to vote, and here's why I'm voting this way. Here's some sort of data, some sort of analysis, some sort of statistics or real-world examples that show me why I think it's better to vote this way. And if someone can present a stronger argument as to why I should vote the other way, then I will vote that way." To me, you know, it's all about being objective and making the right decision that's for our country, you know, that helps out the majority instead of the minority. And so he said, "You're actually going to listen to people?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "That's ridiculous." And he said, "People don't want representatives to listen." He said, "They want leaders to tell them what to do." Now, this is from a Republican leader in town. And I was like, "How can you say that? That's ridiculous." So that gave me insight into what leadership in some parties believe, that I'm going to tell you guys what to do instead of us just having a conversation and deciding what's best to do. I hope that makes sense. I was talking to a friend recently who started getting into politics himself, and Justin's a successful businessman, and he grew up in Louisiana. And he was telling me that when he was growing up, there were a lot of gangs And he said, now that I'm kind of following politics, he said, it seems like there's a big gang mentality. And I said, yeah, I get that. I think that too a lot of times. And I said, but what from your experience, makes you say that? He said when he was growing up, there were two main gangs in his town, and you had to choose one to align with. He goes, if not, they automatically assume you were of the same gang that your family was a part of, or a family member was a part of. You wouldn't dare to wear the wrong colors because you would get jumped. He said it feels like that in politics today. Like you have to be a Democrat or you have to be a Republican. He goes, I don't want to be that. I want to be a critical thinker. I want to think for myself. And I said, thankfully, historically the numbers are turning that way. There are different polls, but the average number in general says that amongst independent voters, they're at 43% across the country, whereas Democrat voters make up 26% of the country and Republican voters make up 23% of the voters. I met a woman recently, I met a new friend, Marcos. He and I were talking, and I was introduced to him because I was told, hey, you talk to Marcos. He's really involved with the Democratic Party in town, and you should network with him and start to reach out to that base. And I love meeting new people. I love picking their brain and just asking questions. I'm not much of a talker. I like to just ask questions and listen, and then from that gain some perspective. And so when I met Marcos, I said, okay, you're with the Democrats, that's great. And I said, I know there's a lot of division. And I said, on the local level, is it like that as well? Do you guys, reach across party lines and just talk to each other and to try to generate new ideas and how to bridge the gap? And I said, because I know corruption is a big thing amongst all parties, fighting that. And he said, God, no. He goes, Republicans are stupid. He goes, we would never talk to them. They have no ideas. And just the disdain in his face, it was one, disturbing, and two, saddening, because that's the kind of hardliner that I'll come across every now and again, where they don't care. If you're not in a part of their tribe, a part of their party, then they want nothing to do with you. They automatically dismiss you. I had the same situation a few weeks ago. I was invited to help out at a soup kitchen, and I was introduced to this woman who is involved in the Republican women's group in Irving. And she asked, of course, the typical question, are you a Republican or Democrat? And I said, I'm not your enemy. And I said, I know you're trying to size me up to see if I'm your ally or your enemy. And she said, well, you must be a Democrat then. She's like, I'll never vote Democrat. I've always been a Republican. My family's always been Republican. And I said, but what if that Democrat is the right candidate for you? He represents you more than the Republican does. And she's like, God, no, I'll still never vote for him. And I said, well, then you lack the ability to be objective. I said, you are in a gang. You have a gang mentality. Of course, she didn't like that. And so she said, no, I don't. And I said, the fact that you said you would vote for a Republican, even though the Democrat represents you better, tells me that you are incapable of being objective. It tells me that you have made up your mind and you're stuck to it. And I said, no offense, ma'am, but I'm really glad that that mindset is kind of fading out and people are educating themselves. And that really ended that conversation pretty quick. But I also noticed that parties are treated like sports teams. Again, we saw that with the Democrats and the Republicans in the last election. It's more important that their party wins than the right candidate wins. The University of Kansas did this great study on this, and they said 41% of partisans, and people who subscribe to one party or the other, 41% of partisans treat politics like sports rivalries. Their party's victory is more important than the real-world implications for society. That's scary to me. I've learned a lot, when talking to people who are Republicans or Democrats that are running for office, and I've seen it a handful of times, where someone from the opposing party asks, is it okay to attend your town hall? And to me, that's sad. You shouldn't have to ask. You're a citizen. You should know that it's okay to be there. We're all here talking together. Thankfully, there is a new era of politicians who are starting to come up. Hopefully, I'll get to be a part of that. Recently, some Democrats contenders and some Republican contenders reached out to me and said, hey, we want to have a bipartisan town hall where we're all talking together and just talking to fellow citizens and brainstorming and networking on what are the most important issues that we want to tackle. And again, a lot of that is corruption and running money in politics. And that's really what got me down this path in general. It was about 10 years ago, I started really researching the issues, and I encourage you today, what's the famous saying today, it's all fake news. There's some truth to that, but I feel like today you really have to cross-reference everything. So whenever one article, or headline grabs my attention, I'll read that, and then I'll read 2 or 3 more, just to make sure I'm getting the meat and potatoes of everything. That way I can make a good, sound analysis. But I really started diving into the issues and started, noticing a trend of corruption, money in politics, and reckless spending. And for me, it wasn't enough to protest. It wasn't enough to be an activist. I wanted to get involved on the front lines, in my mind, on the front lines of good and evil. And so I reached out to friends, posted on Facebook, does anybody have any political ties? Someone I can talk to or, help out with or, brainstorm with. And thankfully I was introduced to some pretty amazing people who I consider mentors now, from different parties. They either held office or hold office or work for someone who held office, or hold office. And we had coffee, and they basically questioned me on every hot button issue and asked where I stood. And thankfully, we were able to come to common ground on a lot of those topics. And so I was asked to work on a city council campaign in Plano. Tom Harrison, super nice guy, and Tom had no money to pay me. I didn't even care about that. And we had a strong opponent we were going up against. This guy had corporate backing. We did not have that. This guy had government backing. We did not have that. He had thousands and thousands of dollars at his disposal to campaign. We had $0. And so I mentioned to Tom, and I said, you know what, if you really want to show people that you're on their side, you got to go talk to them. And have a strong social media presence. Thankfully, come election day, we won hand over fist, easily. Yeah, it was great. It was such an honor to see, to be a part of that. And it was really the encouragement that I needed to make a run for Congress myself. I think in general, the reason the number of independents are growing is because people are wising up. You hear Democratic politicians get called dinos, Democrat in name only. It means they're going to do whatever they want whenever they get elected. You hear the same thing on the Republican side. Rhinos, Republican in name only. They're going to do what they want when they get elected. And what is it that they wind up doing? 60 Minutes did a great story a few months ago. If you guys get a chance, look up Florida Representative David Hawley. He is trying to pass the STOP Act. The STOP Act would prohibit politicians from raising funds on the clock once elected. And he showed 60 Minutes, yeah, right, we need that. He showed 60 Minutes that there are call centers just feet away from Congress. There's a Republican call center and there's a Democrat call center. He said they average 30 to 35 hours a week just telemarketing, trying to raise funds for their party. He said no one spends any time actually legislating. And it reminded me, I love Ron Paul. Dr. Ron Paul, when he was a representative, he was asked, why are you called Dr. No? Because you vote no on everything. And he said, they're like, why do you vote no all the time? And he said, because I actually read the bills. His son, Rand Paul, said the same thing too. Rand Paul famously said the same thing too. So you're starting to get some insight into what these politicians are really doing. To them, there's more congressmen who are stepping out, anonymously, but they're saying, you know what, we're getting elected to basically raise funds. We're saying we're going to do one thing, but once we're in, We're raising money. Hopefully that will be a thing of the past within my generation. So when it comes to independent voters, I love when someone tells me that they're an independent. It actually makes me smile. Jim earlier, he was questioning me. He asked me, are you an independent? I said, well, I'm actually, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And he told me that he's an independent, and it made me smile. Whenever I come across people who say that they're an independent voter, my first thought is this person thinks for themselves. They are not going to be pigeonholed. They're not going to be demonized, and they're not going to be manipulated. I listen to a lot of talk radio. Most of it's conservative radio, believe it or not. And so I just want to get some insight into, what people believe locally. And there's a local radio host the other day. Oh my gosh, he gets on my nerves. I don't know why I listen to him. But anyway, very, very skewed perspective. But he said that he hates independent voters because he thinks they don't stand for anything. And to me, that was the most backwards thinking thing to say. But it does make sense coming from his profession, because it's on the Blaze. So what does that network do? That network wants to demonize anyone who doesn't agree with them. And so it would make sense that someone like that would say that. But in my mind, I'm like, it's great that we have more independent voters, more people thinking for themselves. And the good news is, and if there's any, I'm not the biggest Trump supporter, I'm not going to lie to you. There were a few things in his first 100 days of administration that he wants to do that I love, like term limits. I love that. We need that. And some other things that I hope he actually comes through on. But if I know we saw after Trump's inauguration, there was global protest. And so if anything the Trump administration has taught me is that people are waking up. People are paying attention. And I've met people, and I've had friends say, and friends of friends say, you know what, I didn't realize all this was going on. It's that years and years and years of apathy that has finally caught up with us. It's finally snowballed. Trump is the epitome of what Clinton was allowed to do. Trump is the epitome of what Bush was allowed to do. Trump is the epitome of what Obama was allowed to do. All that snowballed, into this recklessness we have now, where we have to constantly worry about war. And that's the other reason I want to encourage you guys to consider becoming independent thinkers and independent voters, because it's important not only to our fellow countrymen and countrywomen, it's important on the global perspective, for the global community. You guys heard that this last week the mother of all bombs was launched. Over the last 8 years or more, thousands and thousands of civilian casualties have come from ongoing war. Hopefully, since all this awakening is occurring, it'll cause us to become more aware and more knowledgeable of who we're voting for. Because it's time we start electing officials who represent our ideals instead of supporting parties who just pretend to support our ideals. So, despite all the manipulation the DNC and the RNC did this last election year, they need independent voters in order to get their candidates in. Now, I know for me it's pretty frustrating. I think of it as a form of voter suppression. When it comes to the primaries, you have to subscribe to one party or the other. You're not allowed to cherry pick, between Democrats and Republicans. Bernie Sanders saw this also, where as he gained momentum, people started getting more knowledgeable about his campaign. They learned that they had to register as a Democrat months before the primary started, and it was too late. So when you have these rules that are set up against you, along with gerrymandering, you can see how these parties begin to gain a stronghold in different districts. And it's unfair, and unreasonable to determine the fate of all the citizens without asking the input of all the citizens, right? So in today's age, it is not enough to gain knowledge of the issues. We must learn to develop wisdom on how to handle them as well. We've got to end this blind allegiance to parties for our country, especially when our votes and our campaign contributions and our tax dollars are used for corruption and illegal activity. Ignoring your party's corruption is essentially condoning it. If you want to change a party, stop throwing money at it. Instead, throw it at the individual's campaign instead. When you stop supporting a corrupt party, you'll watch corruption take a hit for a change. So let me encourage you again, this era of voting, this era of politics, it's a dawn in my mind of a new era where we are more educated. We have more opportunities to learn thanks to internet research. Again, I encourage you, if you get a chance, visit isidewith.com and you'll see exactly where your ideals align. And I've learned in the past, come election season, that website will actually show you which candidates in your district agree with you on the issues. So it makes it a lot easier and saves you a lot of research time.
Excuse me, I've actually tried to go there and it's not coming up.
Right now, isidewith.com.
isidewith.com, right. I got it.
Did you?
Did? Okay.
Phew, you about to give me a heart attack. You're like, what?
Well, there's also an isidewith.us apparently.
Oh, okay. Yeah, isidewith.com. And if you get a chance, also check.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about your website.
Oh.
Send me to Congress. Whatever it is. That's the one.
That's Facebook. Yeah, facebook.com/sendmetocongress.
You guys send me to Congress.com, and that is not coming up.
Oh, no, it's just facebook.com
It's just
/sendmetocongress. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Anyway, again, I thank you guys for your time, and I'm not sure if I changed any minds. And again, my goal wasn't that tonight. My goal was to actually make you consider, your party alliances and allegiances, and hopefully make better decisions going forward. Thank you so much.
You get to stay there and answer questions.
Questions too?
Oh, yeah. Just you want to.
Sir.
Thank you for your talk.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, everybody.
I just would like to see if you can give us a clue. Obviously, the Republican and the Democratic positions are not where you're wanting to be, but can you define what your position is on various issues?
Well, I'll say.
I'm sorry to throw that at you, but it's kind of like you have me wondering.
Right.
Okay?
Where do I lean on things?
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, that's a fair question. I know for me, I'm running as a libertarian, but more importantly, my platform is to bring objectivity, common sense, and accountability to Washington. To me, that trumps everything. It's all about people first and not party first. And that's, I think, is what's missing today. There are things about Republicans I love, as far as reining in the budget. They never do it, though. There are things about Democrats that I love, wanting to help people so much. For me, again, that would be a long conversation weighing in on the issues. That's why I ask you guys to visit facebook.com/sendmetocongress. I have all the issues listed there and where I stand on them. Thank you.
Okay, so I go to the polls, I get a choice between Democrat and Republican, and I'm an independent thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I always vote for the man I think, or the woman, who do the best job.
Right.
How do you deal with it at the polls? You only either don't vote or you vote Democrat or Republican. What's your answer?
Those aren't your only choices. Only in the primaries that you're kind of your only choice. Right. And that's one thing that I would like to get rid of is, when it comes to the primaries, it should be open season. You should be able to vote for whatever candidate you want in general. It shouldn't, to me, again, that's stifling competition. And again, that reminds me of, if you look at the Commission of Presidential Debates, that was started by Republicans and Democrats, and in my mind, purposely to stifle competition, because you never see third-party contenders there anymore. Thankfully, the Libertarian Party and the Green Party got together and filed a lawsuit, and they won. And so hopefully, now we'll be seeing third-party options in the future. Again, I know a lot of people don't agree with third parties, but there may be those who do, and we should never limit people's options. It would be unfair to have only 2 things on the menu all the time when there are other things that the kitchen can make. That was some symbolism there.
Is there anything that you could share with us? Sorry, you guys. Is there anything you could share with us in more detail about how this limited partisanship affected the Bernie Sanders campaign and things that you'd observed? I thought that your perspective on it was very interesting.
Limited partisanship. Well, I know when, again, from the outside looking in, a lot of it came down to the surge of independent and people who normally don't pay attention to politics actually, liking Bernie Sanders and wanting to support them. The reason they couldn't is because of voter laws in their states, and that was prohibiting people from being able to vote for him at the polls. And of course, there was a little bit of as we saw with the WikiLeaks exposure, a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff that was working against him as well.
I completely agree with your position on being independent. But what I'm looking for is somebody who agrees with my positions on the issues.
Right.
And what I want to see is a clear statement of where you stand on abortion, on immigration, like Trump did.
Right.
Like Trump was out front saying, this is what I believe,
Right.
this is what we need to do, and he was unafraid to say what he believed and where he stood. And
Right.
that's why he won.
Right.
Okay, so I really don't care if you call yourself independent or Republican or Democrat.
Right.
I'm looking at what your positions are
On issues.
and
Right.
how much guts you have
Right.
to carry through what you believe in your position.
Right.
It's like, I get really frustrated. I get really frustrated with politicians who talk about all the stuff I agree with, go to Washington, and then just roll over.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is just really, really frustrating.
I'm with you on that. That's why I mentioned like Republican and
So
only.
what I want is a statement of positions.
Right.
I mean, this is where I stand on abortion, on immigration, on all the other stuff.
Right.
And this is what I'm gonna do, and this is what I believe in.
Right.
And that's what I'm gonna fight for. And then I wanna have some evidence that you're actually gonna fight for those things.
Right.
He's not running
It-
right now.
Actually, I'm running right now. Yeah. But to touch on what you were saying, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And that's why I was encouraged, because the issues, that's going to jump into a whole other discussion. Right now, I'm talking about how we need more independent voters like yourself. If you want to know where I stand on those issues, because I have stances on them, again, you can go to facebook.com/sendmetocongress, and I touch on each one of those, where my stance is. And again, like I said, that's how I would vote, what my views are. But again, if someone can present me with counter evidence as to why I shouldn't vote a certain way or believe a certain way, I'll consider it. I just want to be reasonable. We don't have reasonable politicians.
Back in my misspent youth, I actually went to music camp, and Howard Dean was there at that music camp.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't play saxophone, by the way.
Oh, really?
No, tuba, or he did anyway. But I did some work for the Howard Dean campaign, doing some video work for them. And being an AV guy, I watched the Democratic Party sabotage Dean's campaign with a ridiculous trick where they cut out the crowd noise and just had him laughing raucously, and then they said he lost it and everything like that, and they completely brought him down. So you were indicating you kind of saw that through the Podesta emails on Bernie Sanders. I mean, I know a lot of people who, in this room, who really were Bernie supporters and would have voted for him over Trump, certainly. But, I mean, can you go further into how you saw Sanders' campaign sabotaged?
Sabotage is a strong word, but I guess, I'm without dancing around it, I guess that's what I'm saying. It was. Again, like the emails revealed that. For me, the biggest things were the superdelegates and the rolling back of Obama's ban on campaign contributions. Sanders famously had an average of $27 coming in per supporter, and once he started gaining steam, I think the DNC, really started to, consider that, hey, we need to do something to prevent this, because they wanted an establishment candidate. Again, outside looking in, I think the DNC didn't like Sanders because he is by career an independent, and they wanted someone who was an establishment instead of going with what the general public wants. Again, polling showed that Sanders would have won hand over fist against Trump, but the DNC took a big gamble. They kind of gambled our future, and now we're kind of paying for it. And Trump is doing stuff that everyone thought Hillary Clinton would have done anyway. So the DNC gave us Clinton, look what happened. The RNC gave us Trump, and look what happened. Go figure.
Okay. Who, in addition to Kenny Merchant, is on your ballot?
Her name is, she's a Democratic contender. It's a friend's mother too. I don't remember her name right now.
Okay.
Because I was telling Taylor Curry about this. I don't remember her name, but there is a Democratic
So
contender.
is Kenny the incumbent Republican, you, I think, is Libertarian?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now, if you were elected, would you be caucusing with the Republicans or the Democrats?
Both. Why do we have to have division? That's the other thing. When I went to go talk to one of my, who I consider a political mentor, she works for a senator here in town. And we talked for like 3 hours about every issue. And she had mentioned the frustration with Republican leadership. And I've heard the same thing from Democrats, their frustration with their leadership. And so I asked her, I said, why aren't you reaching across the aisle and just talking to each other? She said, no one would ever go for that. And I said, you might be surprised, and now that I'm getting heavily involved in politics, I am seeing people are sick of the old way of thinking and want to get rid of, again, corruption and recklessness and are willing to work together and talk together.
Okay, I'd like you to comment on this statement.
Okay.
I call the Libertarian Party the Pollyanna Party.
Okay.
And the reason I call them the Pollyanna Party is because they see no need for civil rights legislation. They see no need for legislation to enable LGBTQ equal rights and so on. And I call them, and they don't see no reason for environmental regulation, and the list goes on from there.
Right.
And the reason they say is, well, like Pollyanna, if nobody had any regulations, everybody would magically have a good heart and do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could totally disagree with that premise.
Right.
And my claim is you have to have civil rights legislation to protect people.
Right.
You have to have environmental regulation to keep immoral, unethical business people from destroying the environment, and to make a competitive playing field for those people who want to actually operate in a legal, moral, ethical manner.
I totally agree with you. And I think that's the kind of thinking that I'm trying to, that I'm seeing I'm fighting against. Because people, I think today's generation, or people in general today, they tend to generalize. So they assume, oh, this person thinks this way, they must all think that way. So like you said, you're a libertarian, so you must think this way because all libertarians think this way. For me personally, the stuff you're talking about, I agree with you. But I think when it comes to where you have to consider supporting me or not, I think we have to sometimes ask ourselves, what's more important, what we want or what the Constitution says? And so I know for me, like if I'm running, and I get elected, my first job is to uphold the Constitution. Sometimes that may mean not getting what we want, but I do agree with you. We do need, civil rights. We do need, regulation on business. If we enforce the laws we have now, we probably would be doing pretty good. But that doesn't mean that there's still not more that we can do.
And you do acknowledge that that's against the Libertarian Party platform.
I acknowledge that I would take everything case by case. Yeah. I'm not going to blanket statement everything. Yeah. That's scary to do. That's dangerous.
Roland,
Yeah.
great talk today. You talked a lot about Trump, and you talked a lot about Clinton and about Sanders, and I'm curious to know what your opinion was of the Gary Johnson campaign, which was the Libertarian campaign during the same cycle. What's your opinion?
So let me say this. That site I was mentioning, isidewith.com, here's a great fun fact about that site. It first launched during the Obama-Romney presidential bid. Now, it was a great poll of the handful of millions who took that quiz, because if you go to the website now, it'll show you how the results of the millions who took the quiz. I think at the time it was around 5 or 7 million had taken it, and it shows you which states Obama won and which states Romney won and which states Gary Johnson won. So, judging by the results of that 5 or 7 million during that election year, we would have easily had a third-party president, Gary Johnson. He would have won. And a lot of people don't realize that, a lot of people don't realize that maybe they are a third party, they have third-party ideals. I didn't realize I was a libertarian. Now, I think the other thing, I do like Gary Johnson. I actually researched the hell out of him once I found out that I side with him on that site. And I liked a lot of the stuff that he did. But we have this perception of what a politician should be. He should be polished, well-spoken. He's not that. And I think that's why a little bit Rand Paul has been overlooked. Ron Paul's been overlooked because they aren't the type of, they're not Obama. I think people were more in love with Obama's bravado than they were with his policies. And I think that's what they miss most about him. So for me, I like Gary Johnson, support him. I love his work history. I think he helped, along with Jill Stein from the Green Party, really open up people's minds this last election year because people started to realize, hey, wait a minute, there are other options. How did I not know this? During that Obama-Romney election year, I went to brunch with some friends, and we met some people there, and somehow politics came up in the presidential race, and they were frustrated by the results. And I played dumb. I was like, well, who was running for president? And they said Obama and Romney. And I was like, there are no other options? And they're like, no, and that's what's frustrating. There are never any other options. And that really bummed me out because people are unaware that you have a handful of options, but yet you have this, duopoly that has a stronghold and everything. It's the old divide and conquer mentality. If we can make you think that these are your only options, we can control you. And that's what we need to get rid of. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I appreciate your statement that you would rather be a statesman rather than a politician.
Yes, sir.
To my knowledge, the last true statesman we had was probably Everett Dirksen from Illinois. He was a true statesman. But politics has been money-driven for decades now. And I would truly love to see more of the awakening going on that you mentioned. I think the awakening is the solvent that may break up the clumps in Washington, D.C., the two major parties, and then we can pull the chain and actually flush it.
Right.
Which we desperately need to do if we're to make this country go forward in the way it was designed to be. And so I'm asking you, how strong do you see this awakening happening? Do you think there's a chance that we could have an event like they had in Iceland over the financial collapse when they just threw out all the politicians and everybody elected a new government?
Yeah, that was impressive. I love that. We definitely need more than that. Same happened with the Prime Minister in the UK also. I think a lot of it comes down to people being educated and knowing that they have options. A lot of it comes down to term limits, getting that passed, and probably even bigger still is getting rid of lobbyists. There are approximately 24 to 26 lobbyists per representative. That is insane. And so when you think about these different industries, like the healthcare industry, they have lobbyists there. The for-profit prison system, they have lobbyists there that ask for longer sentences for victimless crimes. These are the sorts of things that we really need to tackle when it comes to getting this sort of corruption out. And again, it is all about educating people and really encouraging them to think for themselves. I mean, that's something you're taught your entire life, but for some reason when it comes to politics, you're not allowed to.
Well, I think what I'm gathering from your message, Roland, is you do believe we should vote our conscience?
I think even that can be misled. Personally, I believe that you should have a good balance of voting with your head and voting with your heart. And a lot of that should be information driven. That's why I mentioned at the end, it's not enough to have knowledge today. You have to have wisdom to know how to address the issues.
Well, speaking of wisdom, if I'm a plaintiff in a case where my rights have been violated, I'm going to want a good law and order Republican judge. But if I'm a defendant, I'm likely to want a good Democrat judge who's going to be a little more lenient, wouldn't you say?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. Dangerous. Hopefully you were never in that situation. Yes, sir.
There are those, and I am among them, who believe that it's voting for anyone who actually has the ability to win the election is totally different from voting for people who have no chance of winning the election. And so I believe that if you vote for Jill Stein or for the Libertarian candidate for president instead of for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, you can vote for the person against the person you think is worse, or you can vote for the person you think is best, of those two. But when you vote for a third-party candidate, what you're really doing is voting to help the person that you like the least. And I find that to be extremely selfish and highly immoral to do that. And I'm curious about your
Take on that.
opinion of it. And remember, I said in campaign in elections where there's a real opportunity for an independent, a libertarian, Green Party, and so on,
Right.
to vote, I would give them a fair chance.
Right. That's backwards thinking. You're basically saying that a person doesn't have a right to choose true representation. You know, let's say, you know, I voted for, you know, Jill Stein or Gary Gary Johnson this last election year because they didn't have a chance. That means I'm being manipulated and forced, and that's what we're talking against today. You know, I'm being manipulated and forced to choose between two evils who I don't care about. The RNC and the DNC already showed us this last election year your vote doesn't matter. So if it doesn't matter, why not vote for someone who you really support?
Roland, I want to know if you recognize a further division among the parties that perhaps I think could be more significant than many of the issue-driven separations. And that is the aspect of being authoritarian. The Democrat Party used to be the go along, get along, you know, let everybody live type party. And yet today, you've got to be on the same page, and you have to believe like they believe and think like they think, or you're ostracized.
Right.
And the Republicans, you have some Republicans who will sit there and say, well, you know, I may disagree with you, but I'm willing to fight to the death for your right to have free speech. And then other Republicans who want to shut you out, they don't believe anybody has a right against the authority except themselves. So, do you recognize that division in the parties?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times the person with the best idea isn't even listened to. An example would be, and again, I didn't get to read all of his plan, but Rand Paul, he's a Republican, Republican libertarian. He's a doctor by trade. He wrote a healthcare bill, and no one would listen to him. As a matter of fact, when the GOP created their own healthcare bill, why can't I say that? Healthcare bill. Rand Paul was all over the news. He was running all around Washington just to get a copy of it, to read it, and no one would show it to him. So what does that show you again? That party leadership comes first, and that's that's the old hat that we got to get rid of. You know, it really comes down to that. Yes, ma'am.
Question about the media manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the parties utilize it, or do you think that the media is just capitalizing on itself, local, national? Do you have any insight that you could give us on how you feel about the media galvanizing the parties?
Absolutely. I know during the this last presidential election, the Washington Post, if you went to go read their reviews on their Facebook page, they were getting blasted because they were posting so many hateful headlines about Bernie Sanders. So it showed you the sort of, and then it came out later again in the WikiLeaks exposure that the Clinton campaign was actually colluding with the media. So it shows you that that does exist out there. And even more so, I know fake news is an issue that people have talked about a lot, and that's why I encourage you guys to cross-reference everything. Cross-reference the hell out of it, until you feel satisfied with what you're getting. To show that there may be more government media manipulation. Before Obama left office, he, as part of the annual National Defense Authorization Act, he actually put a bill in there that is the basically Ministry of Propaganda Defense, which means the government is going to be essentially regulating what sort of news information the public sees, even more so. That should scare the hell out of you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
When the first Gulf War was about to be launched, George Bush Sr. announced that we are starting a new world order. Now that term has come more and more to the surface in later years. How much control do you think this New World Order group actually has on all of the politics and on creating divisive parties that keep us totally distracted from the bigger picture?
Who are the leaders of the New World Order? Would that be the Rothschilds or Soros, do you think? Among them? Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Bill Clinton during a press conference. He said, I forget what question he was asked, but his response was, there's the government that you know and see, and then there's the shadow government that I have to deal with. So that tells me that there is something, some truth to that, there being something behind the scenes that's manipulating them. How to tackle that, to me, I think, I don't know, it's time to bring that era of corruption and manipulation to a crushing end. They had a good run. It's time for us to have our say. It's time for us to, get the right people in office and just get rid of all that money. We need to stop being herded around like cattle. We're sending young men and women to go die in wars that have nothing to do with us. All for profit. Yes, sir.
Roland, you kind of indicated that you wanted to listen to everybody. I have to tell you that I watched the H. Ross Perot campaign back in the mid-'90s, and I watched him fall into a bear trap by his own words, because he kept saying that he wanted to be the will of the people and whatever the people wanted, and to me that really is a problem. I don't think it's as much. You were speaking of how people like to be, or some people say people like to be told. I guess one of your friends was saying,
right,
people like to be told. But see, that would be considered leadership, as opposed to someone who is going in as a fresh mind to look at a situation and offering yourself to be handcuffed and hogbound to what everybody else thinks about it when you're actually there to solve it. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I know for me, I've always been taught that strong leaders serve as well. That's what it means to be a leader, to serve and work alongside of someone, show by example. And just to reiterate, what I did say was, if it comes to me voting on an issue, I'm going to let the people know before the vote comes up, this is how I'm voting and this is why I'm voting. I'll present an argument. I'd like to present, like tonight, statistics, some sort of analysis, real-world examples of things. And if someone can offer a counterpunch, to what I stand for, and offer me some valid evidence, then yeah, I'll change my stance. Like I said, my platform is to bring objectivity, common sense, and accountability to Washington, and that means us talking together. I know for me the frustration is that our representatives don't always listen. You see that across the country, how some representatives aren't even attending town halls anymore. Mostly Republicans won't go to town halls because they're filled with liberals. And you know what? There are people that hate you just besides liberals. There are Republicans too and independents. And so that's a sort of old way of thinking, old way of doing things that I want to get away from. You have an issue with me, let's talk. Let's be civil about it when we have this discussion. Not shout each other down.
get to sit down.
Okay, thank you guys so much. Again, facebook.com/sendmetocongress and isidewith.com. Thank you.
Well, now it's your turn to talk, so if anybody has something they want to say, and for or against what the speaker has to say, come on up here, sit down, and you'll be next. You got 5 minutes.
Okay. In this last election for president, we essentially had two choices. And this is what I have to say to the Republicans who think that Democrats should now join them somehow in cooperating with Trump to advance an agenda. Here is something that was written actually by a person who wrote a letter to the editor of the Hollywood, Florida newspaper. Please understand that I am not mad at you because Clinton lost. I am totally unconcerned that you and I have different politics, and I don't think less of you because you voted one way and I another. No, I think less of you because you watched an adult mock a disabled person while addressing a crowd and still supported him. I think less of you because you saw a candidate spout clear racism day after day and still backed him. I think less of you because you heard him advocate for war crimes and still thought he should be given the reins of government. I think less of you because you watched him equate a woman's worth to where she landed on a 1 to 10 point scale and still got on board. I think less of you because you stood by silently while he labeled Mexicans criminals and Muslims as terrorists. It wasn't your politics I found repulsive. No. It was your willingness to support someone who spouts racism, sexism, and cruelty almost every time he opens his mouth. You sided with a bully when it should have mattered most, and that is something I will never be able to forget. So, in response to your post-election expression of hope, no, you and I won't be coming together to move forward. Obviously, President Trump discussed me, but it is the fact that he doesn't discuss you that will stick with me long after this election. Now, the reason that I'm reading that to you is because in the United States, as it currently exists, we essentially have at the presidential level, this is not true at the congressional level, we have some independents in the Congress, in the Senate, and so on. It's not true at the local level in many places other than Dallas, although when there was a Green Party candidate here that could have actually won a county commission seat, the Democrats supported him and the Green Party abandoned him. So my problem is that I look at the Democratic Party platform, which added support for gay rights to their platform in 1972. And I look at the Republican Party, which to this day still wants to deny gay people equal rights. And in fact, every person that on Donald Trump's list for the Supreme Court is someone who would not only vote to overturn same-sex marriage and eliminate gay rights, but also eliminate the right of women to choose to have an abortion or not, or control of their own bodies. And there are many other things. Donald Trump in the White House was reversing all of the regulations that put in by President Obama that had to do with federal government contractors paying equal pay for equal work to women, while his daughter was running around celebrating the International Women's Day to cover it up. And I'm sorry, but I am a Democrat because I have no choice but to be a Democrat, not for the negative reasons that you stated, but because I agree with the Democratic Party as the party of humane people, the party that wants to have universal health care so everyone has access to health care. that wants to have excellent education, that wants to have equal rights for everyone, equal access to the criminal justice system, and so on, as opposed to the Republican Party, which is nothing but a bunch of greedy, authoritarian oligarchs who think that they have a right to, that do not believe that they can have feel good about themselves unless they knock people down and stand on their backs. And I'm sick and tired of being denigrated as a Democrat, standing up for human rights and for equal justice by people who are really, in my opinion, not to be respected because of their hateful attitude. And so that's why I'm a Democrat. And so I take great umbrage with you when you say that somehow I am not a thinker because I'm a Democrat.
You can do that without being a Democrat.
Yeah, I can be that without being a Democrat and lose every election.
Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. And everyone is entitled to believe whatever they want about how government should be done and how anything should be done. However, I don't think anyone has the right to take their philosophy and shove it down my throat against my will. As to gay people, if you want to be gay, fine. You know, be gay. I probably know some gay people. Probably don't even know it, but I really don't care. I mean, if you want to be gay, fine. But don't force me to support your position because I just don't agree with it, okay? And that's the problem I have with this LGBTQ stuff and all that kind of stuff, or whatever kind of acronym you want to put on it. If you want to be that way, fine. But don't go to a baker and because she doesn't want to make a cake for your gay wedding, sue her and cause the government to put her out of business because she disagrees with you. That is not a free society. That is tyranny. Okay? And it's just, you know, Democrats can have whatever opinions they want. I just don't want it shoved down my throat. And it's the same thing with Republicans. This is why we have a constitutional republic. There are certain rules that we are given to follow in the Constitution by our founding fathers, and if everyone follows those rules, I mean, whatever the government does, as long as it follows the rules, it's fine. Okay, but when the government ignores the Bill of Rights, you know, you have a right to do various things, like you have a right to own a gun. I mean, the Constitution says you have the right to own a gun, and there should be no restrictions on that. I mean, whatever reasons you come up with are irrelevant because the Constitution says you have a right, okay? It doesn't have anything to do with an army or as the UN puts it,
Militia.
Right, a militia, a private militia, okay? It has nothing to do with the government's monopoly of force. Nothing whatsoever to do with that because our founding fathers understood that. Okay, the whole Bill of Rights is about individuals. We don't have collective rights, we have individual rights. Okay, and I don't care what opinion anyone has. I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want, just don't shove it down my throat, and particularly don't use the force of the government to shove it down my throat, and don't take my tax money for your private position. Okay?
Politics thrives on special interest. Politicians gain support and gain funding for their campaigns through supporting special interest. But I would put it to you that the grandest special interest is the individual. And many of the questions we have here are really about, is some minority being discriminated against or denied equal protection? When the individual is afforded equal protection, that goes to everybody. And I don't know how we got so much government so far down our throats, but government is not the solution, as Reagan said one time about a situation. He said, in this situation, government is the problem. And people wish to use government as a hammer, as a tool to wield against others in society. And I really think we all need to stand back and question what we are doing here when we are doing this, because every time you go forward with some utopian legislation that is supposed to bring in pastures of plenty, guarantee Valhalla for everybody, what comes with it is the administration of the authority that you are vesting in government to enact that. And that is where we get the tyranny. I'm sure regulations are needed, because even the founders spoke about this. If you really want to get into the mindset of the founding of this country, go back to the Federalist Papers, to the Anti-Federalist Papers, and study, because many of the issues we kick around today, we're kicking it around in a void, and there's no reason that it should be in that void, because these issues have already been hashed historically, and a lot of wisdom garnered from that debate. So I would say the individual is the key. And if I am protecting Jim's rights, Jeffrey's rights, Tom's rights, Jan's rights, Beverly's rights, then if everybody's getting their rights protected, then I think we're in a better society, and hopefully a less authoritarian society. Thank you.
I guess I'm the last man standing, so I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. One of the things he brought up was a labor statesman, not a labor statesman, the question of being a statesman. It bothers me in one respect. I'll tell you what it is. I was a chairman for a labor union for 20 years, elected by working people, and we had the militant, it was the Socialist Workers' Party that was involved with the unions. And they would call anyone elected a labor statesman to put them in a position that they weren't with the people, to get them out of office. And so my point about being a statesman is that it's a bad word to use. I would rather now a politician, there's a distinction between a politician and a political leader. A good politician figures out which way the people are running, then he gets out in front of them and leads where they're going. Well, a good political leader, on the other hand, gets them running the right direction first, and then gets out in front of them and leads them where they're going. That's what I think you could be, and that's what you should strive for. And not be a statesman, be a political leader.
That's good insight. Thank you.
And in the question of what's going wrong with Congress, you brought up the money and the different things that happen. I ran for Congress 4 times, twice in Illinois, twice here in Texas, as a Democrat, and didn't win any of the times. Took 38% of the vote the first time, and after that, I had $100,000 in campaign contributions, but the second time I didn't get 10 cents. That was in 2000. They all went to Gephardt in Washington and said, where should we send the money? And he said, send to open races, send to incumbents, don't send anything to any challengers. Challengers have got a dime since before the year 2000. I don't know if you know that or not. But that's why challengers can't win elections. That's why incumbents win elections. And that's why incumbent, and we have the best Congress money can buy. That's what's happened. And we got corporations controlling Congress. It's not a good thing. And if the congressman, once he's elected, gets along with these corporations, he gets along fine. If he goes and votes against them, he's out. They'll put somebody else in. And that's the system that we have, and it's not good. The definition of fascism is corporation controlling government. Remember that. And that's kind of where we're going. And it works to our disadvantage. We have to change it. And who has to change it is Congress. And how is Congress going to change it? They have to vote for something that will change it. What will they vote for? In my view, they'll vote to have free airtime the last 90 days of a general election. Why? Because they get to keep the money they raise, plus they get free airtime. There's no history of a challenger beating an incumbent. They can be cajoled and everything into doing it. Once they put that in effect, then some challengers will beat some incumbent because they'll get free airtime too. And when that happens, everything will change. They'll represent the people who do the electing instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then you can put tariffs on corporations overseas. Now, Trump wants to put tariffs against Mexico. That's not going to work because they're going to put tariffs on you. And then you're going to be sitting there, it's a mess. But what you can do is put tariffs on Apple. They produce everything in China. They don't produce anything here. They don't have any jobs here. Why are they producing everything in China? Because it's cheaper and they make more money. That's why they do it. Well, the tariff should be the difference in labor costs, the difference in environmental protections, the difference in transportation costs, maybe even the difference in taxes. Then they had to pay that. They wouldn't like it. But you say, well, if you don't want to pay it, produce it here. You'd have some jobs. And with your jobs, you might recognize the fact that automation replaces people with machines, and machines don't pay taxes. It's been going on since the Industrial Revolution. And today, we've got 25 million people out of work, either unemployed or underemployed. And we got an economy that's suffering. We got corporations overseas. We're $19 trillion in debt. And we got a man in Washington now that wants to make it worse. So this is not working. We got to change things. So I think that a congressman could do a lot of good. I think that we need to put tariffs on corporations. We need to maybe even shorten the workday. That's how you got an 8-hour day in this country in 1938. They reduced the work week from 60 to 40 hours. They reduced the work day from 10 hours to 8 hours. They did not cut the daily pay. They got the same take-home pay in 8 hours they made in 10 hours. It was a federal law, not a state law. It was the Fair Labor Standards Act. And within 5 years, big business and labor went to each state legislature to put the states on a shorter work day because misery loves company want to eliminate their competition. That's how you got the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week. That's how you can get a 6-hour day and a 30-hour work week. And I know that can happen. I negotiated it and it worked. So anyway, this can be happen. These things can happen. And you know, one other thing is the purpose of regulation was never to put the government on the backs of people. The purpose of regulation was to harness the forces of profit and greed and make it work for society instead of against it. And when you deregulate everything, you have the free enterprise of burglars, and that's where we're going. So thank you. You're up next.
I just want to thank you guys again for coming out tonight, and thanks again to Tom and Jim for your help, and also to you for running the camera. I loved hearing everybody's input and perspectives.
You get to respond to what we said now.
You guys said a lot of things that I agree with or made me think as well. I really hope the takeaway from this was that you don't need to align yourself with a party in order to make a right decision when it comes to voting. I think a lot of what you guys said, there's a lot of wisdom here, a lot of experience here, a lot of knowledge here that I can probably learn from, that I can learn from, different experiences. And a lot what you were saying, all of you were saying. It's always good to get different perspectives. I've learned myself, I grew up in a pretty strong conservative household. And you and I actually talked about this time last year. We met briefly. And I grew up in a strong conservative household and even went on to a Christian academy and a Christian Bible college here in town, across the nations. And I learned after I stepped away from working in churches, mega churches, and started to really just meet people from different demographics. I learned how your perspective on things can be very limited when you surround yourself with only like-minded individuals. Tonight, something like this is great. Jim and I were talking earlier, because you get to hear from everybody. Everybody gets to weigh in, either agree or offer counter arguments. And I think this is the kind of thing that we need in general when it comes to politics, when it comes to more competition instead of just two major parties. multiple parties that have a national platform. The way we're hearing all perspectives, people that represent all different types of demographics across the country, because not everybody can be put into this Republican mold. Not everybody can be put into this Democrat mold. Anyway, I want to thank you guys again for your time. My name is Roland Rangel, District 24. If you want to talk afterwards, or you can find me at facebook.com/sendmetocongress. Thanks again, guys.
Well, that's it for tonight. They kick us out of here at 10:30. Just so you know, we got time to talk to our congressman to be here. And see you next week.